Um, Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. I'm one of your co-hosts. I'm Sebastian, and I'm joined with Stacey, who's co-hosting with me. We have 6 incredible debut authors that all happen to live in the DFW area. Many of them also grew up here. And so we'll also have time for a Q&A with some of our authors so that anyone that's interested in finding out more about their Dallas connections, you can ask them about that. And also a little bit about LitNight. LitNight was started by Sandaria Faye, who is spearheading this incredible weekend of events for Dallas Literary Festival. Big shout out to her and SMU and all the co-organizers, many of whom are also reading tonight. And it's been around since 2018, and it's gone virtual. And Stacey most recently read at one last month. But I'll let Stacey take it away and start us off with our first reader.
Great, thanks, Sebastian. Our first reader today is Jenny Bott. Jenny is a writer, book critic, literary translator, and host of the Desi Books podcast. Her debut story collection, Each of Us Killers, was out in September 2020, and her literary translation, Ratnodoli, The Best Stories of Dhumketu, was out in October 2020. Her writing has appeared in venues like NPR, The Washington Post, BBC Culture, The Atlantic, Literary Hub, Long Reads, and others. She lives near Dallas, Texas. Welcome, Jenny.
Thank you, and thank you, everybody. This is so great to be part of this cohort and just this whole festival. So Sandaria, thank you for including all of us. So my book is this, and I'll do a very quick, short reading. One of the things I just want to mention really quick is that this particular story I'm going to read from is a bit of it's tongue-in-cheek, and the reason I say that is one of the biggest challenges that South Asian fiction writers face, especially when it comes to the big 5 publishers, is they like to perpetuate certain stereotypes and certain tropes. And you'll have read some articles about these. Usually when you think about South Asian fiction, some folks think of mangoes and saris and spices and monsoons, the usual tropes. And so I was being a bit subversive in that I decided to write a story which had all of these tropes very consciously. I wanted to put them all in there, but I wanted to see if I could make it so that they were essential to the story as opposed to just thrown in there for exoticizing. And I guess the reader will be the judge, but I will go ahead and read the beginning couple of pages, and I need my reading glasses, so bear with me. And I titled the story Mango Season, which of course, again, mangoes. The Alfonso is the king of all mangoes, and the mango is the king of all fruits. This is what Rafi's mother had always told him each year when mango season came around. Yet, Rafi could count on both hands the number of mangoes he had ever eaten in his 19 years, and none at all since she had died 3 years ago. This evening, at Azad Char Rasta, Rafi bought 2 of the freshest smelling yellow-red Alfonsos. In the past week, he had spotted hawkers displaying greater quantities of several varieties. At 40 rupees each, they were far too expensive, and he took his time choosing them, looking them all over for blemishes and pressing them for ripeness. Now, he had hardly any money left for his evening meal. A vada pav and a cup of adrak chai at the street near the bus stop are not sufficient fare after a hard day's work in the sari department of Madhuri collections during wedding season. As he swung onto the steps of the BEST bus, one hand protecting his wallet from pickpockets and the other holding the overhead rail, Rafi thought he could have, perhaps, begged the Sabji for some advance pay for a good dinner maybe a large onion uttapam with steaming sambar and ice-cold sugarcane juice and a crunchy pan to finish. But along with that thought, he saw the man's sour, gutka-chewing face and put them both out of his mind quickly. His feet stung through the little holes in his shoe soles, and the back of his brown polyester shirt clung wet with perspiration. Quick as he could, he sat next to a man who looked to be middle-aged with his balding head buried in the latest film fare. Oh, so I had to throw in the Bollywood reference as well, of course. The pages were deeply wrinkled, stained, and sticking together in places. A sour, clammy odor of humanity roiled through the entire bus. Everybody had the same expression of wanting to be anywhere else in the world but there, whether they were sitting or standing or anxiously trying to edge around the person closest to them. Ruffy looked out of the window at the teeming and heaving hawker carts, so lush and rich in their colors and smells that even the loud, passionate, customary buy-sell arguments could not do them justice. Glancing further up, he read the ever-present billboards with his usual careful attention. The first proclaimed, "This time is Modi's time." So the story is set during the 2014 Prime Minister elections as well. So Modi is the current Prime Minister. And right below it, Girnar, my chai, my time. A combination which always made him cheer inwardly for the former tea seller and would-be Prime Minister, whose somber face appeared alongside. The next was a new film promising Queen. Everything in life happens for the good. Even, he thought, with a skinny heroine and no hero. And finally, there was bharatmatrimony.com. The right words could get you the perfect match, as the perfectly smiling couple in Wedding Finery proved. The man beside him, flipping his magazine pages earnestly, smiling and chuckling in a silent, shoulder-shrugging hey, hey, hey that Ruffy detested. Stealing quick glances, he saw that it was an article about a glamorous celebrity couple who was pictured in various poses in a sprawling palace-like home. Ruffy's drenched shirt now stuck to the foul-smelling plastic upholstery, and he leaned back tiredly, giving in. Through his half-closed eyes, the many bodies ahead of him seemed to resolve into a single, coiled, snake-like being. The thought that he would need to push through it to get off at his stop started an ache in the back of his head. The bus rattled to a slowdown, not quite stopping for him to jump off at his stop. He hit the ground, still in motion. The friction on impact made his leaden feet sting even more, and the low evening sun stabbed his eyes hard. It always took some getting used to after so many hours of being under the shop's intense lights. After a full day's shift, his eyes hurt like two sore wounds, especially if he had not had a break for some strong afternoon tea and a pan. The man who got off behind him, the one with the magazine, ran into him, swore, and pushed him aside. The pistachio green buildings of Lavender Fields, where the bus dropped him off, had changed so much since the time he had first arrived as a 4-year-old, jiggling on his newly widowed mother's hips. Not that there had ever been any fields, let alone any hint of lavender. Developers loved fancy-sounding names for their sleek new high-rise buildings. This evening, almost every window and balcony beamed brightly. Outside, the uniformed security men laughed and slapped each other's backs as vehicles of many shapes, colors, and sizes slid in and out of the gates. Inside, there were families with respectable men who worked in even taller buildings, pretty wives who often drove themselves to unknown places after husbands left for those jobs, and well-dressed children who went to English schools and on return played video games and watched movies on their big, glaring TV screens. Ruffy knew all this from having spent years going in and out of these kinds of buildings with his mother, as she had cleaned from morning to evening. During the few years when she had forced him to attend a local school, she had picked him up after his last class and taken him along from flat to flat. finding quiet corners for him to sit and do his homework. Rows of shining cars punctuated by variously shaped two-wheelers packed both sides of the street, which had somehow managed to remain mostly clean, except for the perennially dug-up works area that mysteriously moved from one spot to another over time. Autos weaved casually between other vehicles and nonchalant pedestrians going about in every direction. It was a daily scene for him, but on days like today, it was like watching a movie scene in slow motion as he walked by. I'll stop there. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Jenny. That was incredible. I really love that story. And if you haven't gotten Jenny's book, please be sure and get it from the bookstore. There's a link on DallasLiteraryFestival.org. We can buy all of our authors' books. Our next author we'll be reading is Seraphina Nova Glass. She's the author of Someone's Listening, Such a Good Wife, Devil's Lake House, all from Braden House in 2020. She's an assistant professor of instruction and playwright in residence at the University of Texas, Arlington, where she teaches film studies and playwriting. She holds an MFA degree in dramatic writing from Smith College and a second MFA in directing from the University of Idaho. She's also a screenwriter and award-winning playwright. Please welcome Sarah.
I should unmute first. Hi. I'll just jump in. I sort of started somewhere near the beginning of the book. When the clock on the stove hits noon, I pour a tumbler of Pinot Grigio. I make myself wait until noon so I know that I have a modicum of control. I pull my robe tight and slip onto the front porch to sit. The sky is dark, pebbled gray, and the air is crisp. Across the street, a car pulls into the driveway. Ginny DeLuca has forgotten something, it appears. She opens the car door and the speakers inside exhale light jazz music as she runs in and then back out of the house quickly, holding her forgotten item. I notice an autumn wreath on her door. It's barely September, but she can't help herself. I don't bother to wave the way I once did because she would pretend not to see me. Or maybe she'd give an uncomfortable smile and nod. I used to be somebody who secretly, very secretly, swelled with delight when I saw a row of Christmas decorations pop up next to the back-to-school supplies in late August. But now this forcing ahead of time is intolerable. If anything, I want to slow it down, reverse it even. The Sunday paper in its plastic sheath lies at the end of the driveway, half immersed in a puddle from last night's rain. I sip my drink, wishing I would have poured a red, more suitable for the weather, and wonder how many newspapers would have to pile up at the end of the drive before one of the neighbors would check to see if I were dead. I rescue the paper from floating down the gutter. It's bloated with rainwater, but I take it inside and lay out the swollen pages on the kitchen table anyway. I'm relieved not to see my face looking back at me. Maybe enough time has passed and they're finally on to the next life to ravage with speculation and statements of alleged involvement. At my desktop, a chat bubble blooms on my screen. It's Ellie, and although she means well, the sisterly concern she tries to communicate with daily check-ins is becoming exhausting. There are so many times you can circle the same conversation and get nowhere. She's sorry for my loss, I know she is. She wants to make sure I'm eating, she encourages me to work. Her intentions are golden, but it will take a shift into vodka gimlets before I breach that tired conversation today. I ignore the bubble asking me how the weather's holding up and I try to do a little work. But then I click on a folder on my desktop titled Liam. I have kept every email and photo, even the everyday notes he used to leave around the house that I took because I thought they were so sweet. I uploaded them all to the computer over the years. Sorry I drank all the almond milk, I'll pick more up tonight, taped to the side of the fridge. Meet me at Luigi's at 7 on a sticky note on my car. It's silly to keep such mundane remnants, but it was all a part of our evolution together, and I never wanted to forget, even when he was here, the swoosh of the L at the top of this signature. The inside jokes we exhausted. Hardy Har scrolled at the bottom of dozens of these old notes, a secret stupid one-liner just between us. which we'd stolen from some long forgotten TV comedy sketch and made our own language. I cherished each one. All of the photos and instant messages strung together. This was our life. Even our ranting text arguments I never deleted from my phone. And now the pettiness of them fills me with shame. I scroll through some of the last photos of us. His work as a food and wine critic meant the lion's share of our photos were at restaurants. We're pictured together with the stagey for the camera pose, sharing a Scotch egg at a gastropub. We're taking giant bites of a lobster roll off a pier in Cape Cod. There's a short video of him explaining why romesco sauce can go on darn near anything. I clicked to play it even though I watched it countless times. I took the little clip on my phone at an Italian place in New York that I don't recall the name of, but I remember so clearly the drippy camos and the Dean Martin song playing in the background. We'd taken a cab there right from the airport to make our reservation on time, so we were dressed too casually for the place, and we'd had a few Maker's Marks and soda on the plane to celebrate a television spot I'd gotten. It wasn't like him to drink often, and certainly not before he reviewed a restaurant. And I guess that's why I love this clip. Just 32 seconds of Liam preaching the utilitarian nature of romesco sauce, with a dot of it on his cheek, slightly buzzed. My face has become rinsed with tears before I notice, so I close the folder and graduate from wine to vodka, and turn on a house flipping show on the TV to fill the silence. After a couple of miraculous and seamless home renovations, I pull on a wool coat and start my daily work. I print 100 more missing persons posters from my office printer and head out. I look at Liam's face on the poster. It's one we took at Seporia Tutorial last year. My face, along with the veal scallopini we shared that night, are cropped out. I thought it was the clearest photo of him I could find. Today, I'll just go to shops and hang them inside restaurant front windows so the rain doesn't dissolve him.
Thank you, Seraphina. Wow, I feel like all of my senses were engaged during that passage. I could see and hear and feel and taste everything that you were describing. So thank you and congratulations on the publications of your books. Our next reader is Kendra Green. Kendra is the author and illustrator of The Museum of Whales You Will Never See. She has an MFA in nonfiction and a graduate certificate in book arts from the University of Iowa. Between a Fulbright grant to Korea and a Library Innovation Lab fellowship at Harvard, she lent her voice to several anime Amazons, a phonics teaching dragon, and the tabloid time broadcast on North Texas Radio for the Blind. Welcome, Kendra.
Stacey, thank you. I'm so glad to be here with this cohort, right? The inaugural Dallas Literary Festival and its debut authors. I'm taking you to the Museum of Seagull Tricks. If there is a Museum of Seagull Tricks, it is run by one man on a fishing boat puttering into the Husavik Harbor. It keeps short hours. As our whale watching boat drifts past it, the fisherman leaning on the rail of his rig feels the weight of us watching him, his boat, now that we are coming home and too close to land to see any more whales and too far around the rocky outcrop to glimpse another puffin. He drops a handful of fish guts into the sea, and the gulls that have been gathering in the air now dive and clatter in waves of their own making. He takes 2 handfuls and tosses them high against the sky, and another gust of birds swoop and swallow and circle back, neither their feathers nor the fish guts ever touching the water. Next, the man extends his arm and holds up a chunk of fish flesh like a beacon, and a single flapping bird suspends itself in the air and eats from his hand. We have begun to clap. Exultant, defiant, the man holds up another chunk of fish, perhaps higher this time, and the beat of all those wings tighten to him. Such intent in these birds, such tense cunning and strike. It is all potential. Anything could happen. And then the man reaches out into the snugging swarm and plucks a bird from the air. Seagulls may not be the most expressive of beasts, but this fowl in this moment is startled to the brink of its bird brain, swivels its head and cranes its neck, looking around wildly, not at the man so much as at the air that has become hands, and wool sweater fit just so around the bird, who has not until this moment thought of air or hands or wool sweaters, has thought only of fish and occasionally the sea, but is now tucked under an arm and bewildered, perhaps consoled. Our boat is much bigger than the fisherman's. From the railing of our deck, we look down at the scene and applaud. There are scores of us. We are zipped up in insulated blue onesies like astronauts or throw pillows, essentially snowsuits, but waterproof to protect us from the sea spray and edged in reflective tape so we can be seen if we topple overboard. We have been given hot chocolate and cinnamon rolls here in the calmer water, returning home, still swaddled in our suits, though we are not so cold without the wind on the open water and the speed of the boat. Our faces, indeed our eyes, our hearts, are open. This display on the little boat has taken us completely by surprise, and we press to the railing and beam. The fisherman takes the seagull from under his arm and with two hands throws it into the sky. The gull flaps away furiously, all adrenaline and disdain, until finally, having shaken off the shock, it drifts back on the draft because whatever it was that just happened, you never know. There might be more fish. The fisherman looks back at us, returning our gaze. He slaps his hands together to say, "It's over. That's it." But we just continue to beam at him, enchanted. He waves us away. He draws a finger across his neck to say, "It's finished. No more. How many seagull tricks do you think there are anyway?" Yet we do not turn away. We do not go about our business, and we don't shift our view to the port we have been sailing to the whole time. We do not so much as toddle off to see if there's one last pastry left among the crumbs in the basket. The fisherman looks at us like we've missed the point. In lieu of an encore, he turns his back to us and takes up anew the business of fish and nets and boats. He does not look at us again, which I know, because we remain at the railing, craning from that border's edge, adjusting our bodies and our gazes only so that we may keep the little fishing boat in view. And we continue to watch, snug in its thrall, long after there's anything left to see. Thank you.
Wow, thank you, Kendra. It's always such a delight to hear you read. I love how you always animate the world that you're describing. You truly did take us to that museum, so it's wonderful. Thank you. Our next reader is Simon Hahn. He is the author of Nights When Nothing Happened from Riverhead Books. He was born in Tianjin, China, and raised in various cities in Texas. His short stories and essays have appeared in The Atlantic, the Iowa Review, Guernica, Electric Literature, and the Texas Observer. He's recently received awards from the McDowell, the Tulsa Artist Fellowship, among others. A former visiting professor at the University of Tulsa, he currently lives in Carrollton, Texas. Please welcome.
Thank you. I'm really excited to be here. It's going to be a challenge following Kendra, but I'll try. So I'm going to read just from the beginning of Nights When Nothing Happened, close to the beginning. And so I did a very strange thing of setting this novel in Plano, Texas. and it's maybe a city that's familiar to many of you, and it's set in 2003. So that's where we are here. Do not say die, his English teacher said. Do not say stab, murder, choke, shoot, or bomb, especially bomb. Mr. Morris rolled up his sleeves. Veins snaked up his arms and under his shirt like those of bodybuilders or the elderly. Mr. Morris could pass for either. Never say bomb. It was August. Jack sat at his new desk chair, not sure what to do with his legs. The formation of rows and columns left him feeling exposed. In girls, some wore perfume. Scents welled from below their necklines, calling back the candied fruit that he'd once swiped from the street vendors outside his grandparents' apartment. He had not thought about the taste of glazed strawberries and pineapples and shanja for so long, the way he'd slid them up and off the skewer with his teeth, and the vendors, the spittle in their mouths as they raised their newspapers to whack him. The girl in front of him turned around, the end of her ponytail whipping the top of his hand, to pass back a stack of letters, each addressed to the parents and signed by the principal. On his way to America, Jack remembered, he had carried a letter too, a letter from his parents, a letter to prove that he belonged to parents, written in English. Is punch okay? A boy asked from the back of the classroom. You can probably say punch, Mr. Morris said. What about assassinate? Assassinate is usually reserved for public figures. What about manslaughter? Manslaughter, Mr. Morris said, as if trying out a name for a newborn. He fingered the swirl of his tie. Well, manslaughter is not a verb. Speaking of verbs, a voice behind Jack said, I'm scared. Heads swiveled around, but no one could identify the speaker. Fingers were pointed in opposing directions, giggles shushed. After class, Jack wondered if he had been the speaker, if somehow he hadn't known. Jack should not have been scared. His parents had decided to live in Plano in order not to be scared. Plano had the lowest crime rate in Texas, highly ranked schools, churches bigger than schools, lighted tennis courts, malls that closed before 9 p.m. He did not know, even by middle school, that in the late 1990s, this affluent suburb had been dubbed the heroin capital of America, nor that in the early 80s, it had been called the suicide capital of America. Every year, a new wave of residents diluted the collective memory of the city like fresh customers unwittingly enlisted in a company's rebranding. Just say no was as much as his teachers were willing to tell him. No drugs, no suicide, no fights, no sex, no drinking, no depression, no slacking, and now no saying, you want to die? No more, I'm going to kill you. And though no one had taken those threats seriously before, banning the words morphed them into something serious, something threatening. That night, his mother brought the letter to his room. She lay at the foot of the bed, the balls of her feet pressed into the carpet. His grandpa had talked about how, as a child, she'd walk over the knots of his back. Should I worry? She asked. His mother had always been a bony person, a woman of acute angles and protrusions. In the photograph propped against the tin of sunflower seeds, baby Jack had seemed eager to get off her lap. He had not seen the picture since he'd left China, but having his mother near made him want to remember her, the way she'd been when she was far. Mom, he said. Jack leaned against the headboard with another of his old choose-your-own-adventure books in his lap. The books were too easy for him, but it was nice to fall asleep before reaching the end. When there were multiple endings in a book, the one he arrived at always left him bereft, though he could not say of what. He lost his page. A few ends of his mother's hair fell over his toes. What would it feel like to touch his mother's face with his feet? A privilege reserved, perhaps, for babies and toddlers who would grow up unable to remember what it had felt like to touch their mother's faces with their feet. Stop there.
Thank you, Simon. Wow, what beautiful sentences you crafted there. And I'm really excited that you wrote a unique perspective on Plano, Texas. So I think it's probably very much needed. Congratulations on your book. Our next writer is Matt Morton. Matt is the author of Improvisation Without Accompaniment, winner of the A. Poulin Jr. Poetry Prize selected by Patricia Smith. His poems have appeared in Agni, Gettysburg Review, Harvard Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, and elsewhere. He has received fellowships and awards from the National Endowment for the Arts and the Fulbright Program, among others. He serves as associate editor for 32 poems and currently teaches writing in Dallas. Welcome, Matt.
Thanks so much, Stacey, and thanks to all of you for being here. I'm going to read just one poem from my collection, Improvisation Without Accompaniment. I grew up in Rockwall and spent all my childhood in the DFW area, and I've now been back here for 6 years. But I took a brief break from Texas when I was doing my MFA on the East Coast. And it wasn't until I had some physical distance from the state that I began to think about what it meant to be from Texas. And the poem I'm going to read was born somewhat out of that thought process. It's a persona poem from the perspective of the ghost of Lee Harvey Oswald, who is a famous Texas and Dallas figure, as we know. After I wrote the poem, I realized uncannily that I also share a birth date with Oswald, and I now live just a few blocks from the mural of Oswald in the Bishop Arts District, and then only a few more blocks from the Texas Theater where he was apprehended. And it's one of my favorite places in the city. So the poem's called Self-Portrait as Oswald's Ghost Addressing the Warren Commission. Well, first of all, for the record, I was a boy. I rode the trains underground with my face pressed against the front car window, and I could not have been closer without falling into it. The darkness in front of all the people watching from the platform, which is to say we were racing past faster, always them wearing their anonymous faces, no doubt practiced. Or perhaps it was me who was anonymous in their eyes. Only you see, sirs, if I may, it was this, that I wanted to be included in what is known to us as history. I have read many books on the subject, stepping into my own role the way you might feel the temperature of a doorknob before turning it and entering a room. As if a man could make a sort of covenant with the world, so that no matter what he did or did not do, it would be marked down and permanent. Like how I was a boy sitting with my mother nights and the screen's blue flickering. Or for another example, take the spy planes. I am a veteran, do not forget it. I have been to Japan and Moscow. How the sleek chrome planes fired off the cruiser and vanished into the secret altitudes. And all of it a life, connected by a pattern drawn on the land, a code, as if planted there sometime before me, conspiring to lead me through a life that wasn't mine at all, but a series of events which from the start had the name Lee, Marina would say. Lee, do you love me? And the pattern waiting there too. Okay, sirs, yes, I see. You want to know, you're asking if it was me shot him. And that, sirs, is hard, a very indeed difficult question. Because say my right finger was poised on the trigger, and the sun glinting off the overpass. And although it was November, the grass somehow green, and once in Fort Worth, it's funny, I was a Texas boy, see? Once I held a can of Coke as cold as solid ice up to my cheek, and I rode trains with my face touching darkness. And if this all happened truly to me, your question then has implications going beyond what you are asking. Because what is one man really? When all of my life was this question, asking itself over again, which was, is there someone helping me do these things I was? And me hoping, certain history was something a man could become, though all the time afraid I was acting alone. Thank you.
Thank you, Matt. Such a pleasure to hear you read that poem in particular. I know you have many excellent Texas poems as well. Be sure and check out Matt's book. It's really nice that we're closing out with 2 poets, but at the very end, hopefully we can talk a little bit more about these Texas connections that we're seeing across the board with our writers this afternoon. So we're gonna close off with Mike Soto. Mike is the author of the chapbooks Beyond the Shadows, Inc. and Dallas Spleen. Most recently, he is the author of A Grave is Given Supper, which has been adapted into an original literary theatrical performance by Teatro Dallas, directed by Claudia Acosta and starring Elena Hurst. And I believe you can catch a virtual show of that from Teatro Dallas. Mike can probably tell you a little bit more about that. But please welcome Mike, who is currently broadcasting from New York right now.
Hello. Hi. Okay, so yeah, so I'm gonna read a couple of poems from my debut book of poetry called The Grave is Given Supper. And yeah, Sebastian's right. There was a original stage adaptation that we did in November with Elena Hurst and Claudia Costa in collaboration with Teatro Dallas. So if you want to see that, it's a pretty unique performance. It's available to stream on the Teatro Dallas website. I can put the link in the chat in a little bit. So I'll read a couple of poems from A Grave is Given Supper. This first one is called The Wall Commonly Known as the Brow of God. In Sumidero, the wall is always looming. Night and day are North Star, blunt reminder of the difference between this life and the one in El Norte. Afar, the reason why the ground is gutted with tunnels, decades of desperate maneuvers, so many names trapped in trying. If not a tunnel that connects a pink corner store basement to the bathroom of a Texaco where a razor and a change of clothes wait, then a tunnel that connects a restaurant table always reserved to an empty pool in a house in Calexico. If not the tunnel that takes you to a Malverde shrine in Agua Prieta said to be teeming with luck, then a tunnel that runs through a copper mine to a greenhouse in Las Cruces. The above the ground alternatives. Snake yourself into an engine block of a truck. Agree to have your body stacked under cargo. Endure the heat rising exponentially in a trailer inching towards the border, with a sea of other vehicles all in the same limbo. Covering desert, valley, and mountains, the wall is an endless mine of steel bars east of Nogales, creased slabs in the worst parts of Sumidero, where many use the barrier as the fourth wall of their homes. Some sections of the wall are rigged with ground sensors and tracked by drones, and some are an open invitation to walk a cemetery of scorched sand. But the section stitched into the minds of everyone that lives here is a section of the wall most have never seen, miles away, where they say the wall goes into the ocean, and the constant fog serves to hide that it ends or to maintain the awe of it going all the way across. This one is called Untitled Tunnel with Horse and Rider. That night told my life, be a tunnel. Connect the gold green wind to the breath you'll use to clear the dust caked on Malverde's shrine. To reach the unlit side of my life, I became a prodigy, suffering to wake from a dream twice the size of my sleep even then, when people said a curse, a weight that doubled at night, that death disguised as dreaming sat on my chest while I slept. But I only felt misunderstood. When I overheard a rumor the first ever shrine to Malverde lay hidden in plain sight in a used car lot somewhere in Sumidero, I took it as a life and death matter to see the unseen. After years of wandering lots of old Beetles, Buick LeSabres, luxury Broncos, after getting kicked out of dealerships for being bearded and weird, after leaping waves of barbed wires on walls at night, a dash covered in banana leaves called to me by name. I opened the door to a late model Astro, hollowed out to house the stones that first made his grave. Above them, a cornucopia slipped around the vague bust of Malverde. Finally, with my chance, I took the deepest breath I owned, blew the veil from his face, and when I placed my hat on his head, the trembling I carried for years inside me paused like a deer from drinking water. And in that non-distance between us awoke a neon quiet where I dumped all the marigolds of all the cemeteries I've seen, lit the candles I didn't bring, and poured him the añejo I could never afford. A space where I could sign my name with my knees and ask for help. I knew the next phase of my life would need a different tunnel, one that connected my ignorance to an isthmus where I'm a rider letting his horse graze the grass. Thank you.
Right, thank you, Mike. I just want to say again, thank you to the readers. And I know this is called Dallas Debut Authors, but I just want to also add that, you know, there are so many incredible books that have come out from Dallas authors in the past year and are coming out. I just want to mention a few more names for y'all if y'all are interested, because we couldn't fit them all into one event. But we have Fauzia Karimi. I saw that Kendra had her book on her bookshelf behind her. We also have Ross Wilcox, who is pressmates with Jenny Bott. We also have Katie Condon, who teaches at SMU and has recently moved to Dallas, and Kendra Allen, who's another poet who has a book coming out next month, I believe. And also Alejandra Ramos Gomez, I believe she just had a book that just came out. So check those authors out. And if anyone has any questions, you can drop them in the chat. We have a few minutes to take one, two questions real quickly before we wrap up. Stacey, I believe we had some questions prepared for. You want to ask one of those?
Yeah, well, I think we've heard a little bit about how you all are related to Dallas and how that affects your writing. Jenny mentioned to me beforehand that she had a few things that she wished she would have known from other authors who had debuted books close to her. So Jenny, if you have any of those tips or things that you wish you would have known, maybe you can share some of those.
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, it's a long list of things that, you know, as a debut writer, especially during a pandemic, I think that, you know, in terms of how you build networks, I think that would have been very helpful to know beforehand. But I think, you know, one thing I like is that coming into Dallas, and I moved here just last year. I've been here before, but I moved here last year. And I need to say that finding Santeria, finding LitNight Dallas, finding Sebastián, and just I think the whole literary network in the Dallas area is so vibrant. And I think I would say to any debut authors who might be watching this, make sure you get connected and make sure you participate. It's not just enough to just, you know, show up, but I think participate and get connected. And I wish I had been here for years before and being able to participate, but I think that's very important to get in with your local literary community and make sure you're contributing and, you know, adding value that way. So yeah.
There looks like there's a question from the audience for Mike. What or where is Sumidero?
Hi. Okay, so El Sumidero is a fictional border town that I made up to that sort of like emulates, I would say, Ciudad Juarez, sort of like a border town. But I chose to fictionalize a border city sort of in order to incorporate like a bunch of different elements to sort of like adapt elements from El Topo, Alejandro Jodorowsky's movie, into my book. So it's a fictional border town, and that's what El Sumidero is.
Great. And Jenny, sorry, I got distracted. I love that answer, and I've found a lot of support and help in this local Dallas literary community. So I think that's great.
Yeah, I mean, we connected, you and I, in a similar manner. You'd met or seen me at LitNight. And so I just think that it's great for people to have those connections and to add value and build this community. And I think Santeria sets such a good example for all of us in that. So
yes, she does. If any of the rest of you have any other things you'd like to add to that question, or I can ask another question very quickly.
I mean, I have a couple thoughts really quickly. Just this probably applies to poets only, because I know fiction writers have both agents and ways to make money with their first books. That's not available to poets. I'm sure Mike knows as well. But given that the primary way that first books of poetry are published are through contests, I found that being not only persistent but comprehensive in terms of submitting to a number of contests and repeatedly for a number of years, that was necessary for me to get my book accepted, and also not to be discouraged if you don't have any affirmation in terms of being a finalist or even a semi-finalist for contests, because I had submitted, I think, my book to 40 or 50 contests, some of the same ones multiple times, with only 2 semi-finalist awards and no finalist awards. And then my book ended up getting taken by one of the contests I was most excited about. And just one other thing that might apply to both genres is not to be precious about your manuscript. I mean, it took me 3 years of sending it out to get the book accepted. And the version that I sent it out in originally wasn't flawed per se, but by the time I was sending out in year 3, I was a slightly different person. And so the book no longer kind of fit what I wanted it to be in the new iteration of myself. And so I'm not sure if those revisions that I made in that 3rd year contributed to the book being taken or not, but it did seem to fit who I was at that time better. So it's less an admission of, oh, there were so many mistakes in the first version, and rather, oh, let's see how I've evolved and how the book might, be tweaked even in small ways to mirror that evolution. So persistence and being open to changing were both helpful for me.
I love it. I think Catherine has appeared to let us know that our time is up.
Yes, thank you guys so much for all coming to talk today. So big thank you to all our panelists, and thank you to everyone who came and attended. We have 2 more events at the 4 o'clock hour, Trends in Black Fiction and Tolstoy Together, a Pandemic Project. So we would encourage you guys to go ahead and attend those as well if you'd like to. Thank you guys all again for coming.